Hello everybody. Today we learn the subject basics of translation. Today we learn the basic feature of translation. We learn the type of translation and also some issues of translation. Now, first of all, we learn the type of translation and also the features of translation. The nature of translation. What is generally understood? And translation involves the rendering of a resource language text into the target text, ensuring that the surface meaning of the two will be approximately similar and the structures of the source language will be preserved as closely as possible, but not so closely that the target language structure will be seriously distorted. And now we have some concepts. Have a look at some concepts. We have a various definition of translation. Also, we should know something about the aim of translating, the qualities, the tasks of translator, etc. Now, first of all, we go into the definition of translation. There are several kinds of translation. Of course, the first one, by dictionary definition, translation consists of changing from one state or form to another, or turn into one's own or another language. Translation is basically a change of form. When we speak of the form of language, we are referring to actual words and phrases, sentences and paragraphs, etc. And that is the first translation definition. And now we move on to the second definition. Translation is the expression in another language, in this case target language. And what has been expressed in one language, source language, preserving semantic and stylistic equivalencies. So what is a source language and what is target language? When we do the translating from English into Vietnamese, so in this case, English is the source language and Vietnamese is target language. And vice versa, when we do the translating from Vietnamese into English, in this case, Vietnamese is the source language and English is the target language. Okay, now the third translation is the replacement of the presentation of a text in one language by the presentation of an equivalent text in a second language. And also, the fourth definition, translation is rendering a written text into another language in a way that the author intended the text. And 5, the translator are concerned with the written text. So when they render written text from one language into another language, translator are required to translate text with a range from simple items including for example, birth certificate and driving license and some more, or articles, journals, etc. And now 6, the sixth definition. Translating may be defined as a process of transforming size of or representation into another size or representation. If the original has some significance, we generally require that the images also have the same significance, or more realistically as nearly the same significance as we can get. 7. Translation can be defined as follows. That is the replacement of textual material in one language by equivalent material in another language. And 8. One of the most important factors determining the purpose of translation is the addressee who is intended receiver or audience of the target text with their country-specific word knowledge, their expectation, and their communicative needs. Every translation is directed at an intended audience. Since to translate means to produce a text in another target setting for a target purpose, and target addresses in target circumstances. And the definition 9. Translating consists in reproducing in the receptor language closest natural equivalent of the source language message. Now, in this definition, we pay attention to how to keep the message from the writer to the reader. And 10. Translation leads from a source language text to a target language text, which is as close and equivalent as possible and presupposes an understanding of the content and style of the original. In this case, it means that we have to keep the content and the style of the original of the writer. Now 11. Whether translation is an end in itself, in the sense of simply seeking to extend an originally monolingual communicative process to include receivers in another language, then it must be conceived as an integral communicative performance, which without any extra textual additions provided by an insight to the cognitive meaning, linguistic form, and a communicative function of the source language text in this case. This definition is rather abstract and it is rather complicated, but yeah, that is in the aspect of the linguistics. Another 12. The linguistic approach is basically short translating as a code-switching operation. Yeah, this sentence, this definition is very short, with more pragmatic reorientation at the beginning of the 1970s. Yeah, and that is a definition. And 13, the ideal translation would be one in which the aim in the target language is equivalence as regards the conceptual content, linguistic forms, and communicative function of source language. As all in all, we have several definitions, but all in all, we have to pay attention to translation process. Actually, the translation is the first science, okay? And sometimes we can consider it is a skill, and sometimes we consider translation to be an art. And also, sometimes we consider translation a matter of taste. Yeah, so we can say that translation or doing the translation can be a hobby. And in the next part, we move on to the nature of translation. There are several aspects we have to pay attention to. The first nature of translation, that is the feature reproducing message. It means that we have to understand the message of the writer, and we have to convey, we have to try to find the equivalent in order to keep the message of the writer. And next, we have to pay more attention to equivalence than identity, because when we do the translating, we have to keep remain the meaning of the text of the sentence of the even of a paragraph. We should not pay attention to the identity. So identity is not important at all. Yeah, the main thing is to give the message. So equivalence is a help. And in the next part, we learn something about dynamic equivalence. Yeah, formal correspondence. So, what is dynamic equivalence? So, dynamic equivalence means that we can try to find out the equivalent. Yeah, it means that dynamic here means changeable. We may have several kinds of equivalence as long as the translation contains the right message of the writer. In this case, the dynamic equivalence can give us the communicative aspects rather than abstract value. And sometimes we have to pay attention to the target counter situation. Another word we can say it is a functional adequacies. Yeah, of course it can replace the former equivalence. Another matter is that we can define the dynamic equivalent. It can be defined in terms of the degree to which the receptor of the message in the receptor language responds to it in substantially the same manner as the receptor in the source language. And this response can never be identical for the cultural and historical setting. Too different, but there should be a high degree of equivalence of response. And the next thing we have to pay attention to with the nature of translation, that is a natural equivalent. Here, natural equivalent refers to the three areas of the communication process. A natural rendering should fit the hello receptor language and counter the context of the specific message and the receptor language audience. Therefore, the translation should bear no obvious trace of foreign origin. A natural translation would have to deal with the two main areas of adaptation. So, two main areas are here, grammar and lexicon. The grammatical adaptation takes place more readily since one is obliged to make adjustments such as shifting words order or using nouns instead of verbs in the receptor language. The lexical structures of the source message is less easily adjusted to the semantic requirements of the receptor language because there are no strict grammatical rules but a variety of options. Okay, that's all about the natural equivalent, and now we move on to the next. And that is the relationship of meaning, style, and counter. Now, what about the significance of meaning in doing the translation? Meaning must be given priority. It should come first. Because meaning can form the content of the message. It is very important when we do the translating. We may have to pay attention to the word, the phrase and clause. So meaning is also a connection among words, phrases, even sentences. All the formal features combine to produce what is the formal correspondence. However, when we speak of verbal consistencies in translating, we focus primary attention upon the way which specific words are translated. In order to find out the right meaning, and also to keep the verbal consistency, we may have a rule for this. Always translating one word in the source language by a corresponding words in the receptor language. And now we have several reasons for the significant meaning. Now, each language covers the experience with a set of verbal symbols. Second, each language is different from other languages in the way in which the set of verbal symbols classify the various elements of experience. And now the style. Sometimes the style can be very important. Sometimes we don't need to pay attention to style. It depends on the kind of style that we do the translation. And there are several kinds of style of writing here. We have for example, the first one is officially. Second, officer, and then we have a formal, neutral, informal, colloquial, slang, and taboo. Yeah, and those are the kind of style of writing. Sometimes it is better for the translator to keep the style of writing. Now, what about the counter? The importance of counter. Sometimes counter can play a very, very important part in doing the translation. Yeah, the key factor is counter sensitivity. Not only do translators have to communicate message from the source language into the target language, but they also have to take into account the counter of the language. So we have to pay attention to the counter in order to avoid misunderstanding. Yeah, sometimes counter can lead people to misunderstanding, so be careful of this. And there are varieties of counter elements to take into consideration. For example, you may find out something about the name of company, the name of a products. You may have a humor material counter, such as the names of food, the style of language. All of them can contain some kind of cultural aspect. And the next thing, when we try to provide the translation with equivalence, we may have several kinds of equivalent here. We may have regular equivalent. In the regular equivalent, we may have several more kind of equivalent, such as lexical, phraseological, grammatical equivalent. And in another direction, we may have a permanent equivalent, and sometimes we have a non-permanent or variable equivalent. Yeah, so those are the kind of equivalent. Now we move on to the next. Why should we use the varieties of equivalent? Sometimes we have to pay attention to the context. So it is necessary to find down the type of context, and there are two kinds: linguistic and non-linguistic context. Because linguistic context and even sometimes non-linguistic context can give us some kind of information, or we can make a prediction or make a guess the real meaning via situation. Now, and the next, sometimes we have a variable equivalent, and that is sometimes we can think of the grammatical structure, and sometimes it can be short. For example, we can do sometimes using idiom, especially using idiom. For example, when you are in Rome, yeah, do as the Roman does. Yeah, so that is the kind of translation. Sometimes it is very easy for us to find out in this case the equivalent, variable equivalent. Yeah, sometimes it is rather difficult. And now we should know something about the occasional equivalent. So what are they? The first one, using loan word. Sometimes we have tried to borrow the word from English, such as hot dog, but actually there is no equivalent at all. We have to borrow. Due to the cultural factor, we have no official translation of hot dog. Second, with the approximate substitute. That is the approximate translation. When have to form the partially equivalent to the equivalent. Now next, 3, using transformation. So what is transformation? When we do the translation, we have to change the part of speech from noun into verb, from adjective into verb or adverbs. Sometimes we can turn a word into a phrase, or a phrase we turn into clauses. Now, for example, your presence at the meeting is not obligatory. In this case, your presence is a noun. But when we translate it into Vietnamese, không bắt buộc cậu phải có mặt trong cuộc họp đó. In Vietnamese, cậu phải có mặt. It is a verb. But in so text we have your presence. It is a noun. So that is the way. Now 4. Zero translation. When the meaning of the grammatical unit is not rendered in the translation, since it is non-existent in ThS language. Sometimes we don't have to change any part of this. So when we have an example, it is late, we may translate muộn rồi. And what does the translator do? Maybe we have several jobs. The translator have to try to be familiar with the concept, the source language, target language, and the subject matter. He should have try to do a lot of reading in order to get a lot of background knowledge. And also the translator has to improve his language ability. Yeah, both the source language and the target language. He also have to master both of them. And now next we have different kind of element here. The source language. The source language is the language to which the text to be translated belong. What about the source text? The source text is the text which has been chosen for translation. And what about the translator? Translator is a human agent who knows two languages or more, or who can express the message of the text from one language using the system of the other. The next element, that is the translator text, is the source text is taken to be the starting point of the translation process. Then the translated text is the text which results from the translation process. It is the result. And for language of translation, the language of translation can be obtained via the study of translated text. So it depends on the register of the translator. So we have a different translator. We have a different text, but of the same source text. We may have a different target text. Depending on the abilities of translator, we have a different kind of register language. And the target language is the language into which a text from another language is translated. Yeah, very short. And now there's a difference between interpreting versus and translating. In this case, interpreting that is the translation orally. Yeah, orally translated. Yeah, but actually translating is a kind of written text. But in doing the translation, we have to pay attention to the denotative meaning. Sometimes for speaking and for the spoken text, and for the written text, we have the connotative meaning. For interpretation, we may have different kinds of interpretation. Yeah, we have consecutive interpretation, simultaneous translation or interpretation. In this case, simultaneous interpretation is a very complicated. It is applied during a congresses, conferences, and seminar, workshop, and business meeting. It is very complicated. And now next, the job of the interpreter is that he or she has to pay attention to the question with the debate, different people who take part in the conversation. But the translation of the written material is a slow process, because the translator has a lot of time to look at the source text and the target text again and again, and he or she may make some kind of arrangement. And the basic difference between translation and interpretation, we have to pay attention to the form. Actually, translation is written, it is for written text, and interpretation, that is for the spoken form. And now we move on to the type of translation. Now, the first type of translation is word-for-word translation. In this case, the translator has to rely on the meaning of word and also some connected word in a phrase. Mostly he or she rely on the meaning of the word basing on the dictionary meaning. Word for word translation focuses mainly on translating words from the short text into the ThS language. And second, literal translation. So what is literal translation? It is apart from the literal and possible translation. In this case, the translator has to pay attention to grammatical structure. Of course, they will be converted into the nearest ThS language equivalent. Literal translation is featured by the fact that grammatical structure and the meanings of words are translated almost as closely as though in the ThS language, without paying attention to the situation or context. Yeah, for literal translation, we pay attention to grammatical structure, not the situation. And now, faithful translation. In this case, we have to pay attention to both grammatical structures and the context. Yeah, both. In this case, context means the situation. Faithful translation can be described as one kind of translation which has to convey the meaning of words and context situation according to the grammar rules of ThS language. And semantic translation. In semantic translation, we have to focus on the degree of meaning, that is called semantic content, and the form of the text. Yeah, we have to pay attention to the literature or the speeches, but mostly we have to pay attention to the semantic aspect, or even the meaning. And the next kind of translation is communicative translation. So, communicative translation is a kind of free translation, but mostly we consider the communication situation. Actually, it is for the communicative purposes. What about idiomatic translation? Mean that when we try to find out the equivalence, we try to find the idiomatic equivalence. Yeah, sometimes it is rather to produce the same message with the same idioms. So mostly when we do the translation, we maybe in some cases we have the idioms, but sometimes we have to provide explanation. And the next kind of translation is free translation. Free translation focuses on the content of the ThS text rather than the form, which means that the same content is expressed in the ThS text, but with the different grammatical structures if need be. But mostly it's depends on the situation and also the intention of the translator. Yeah, so that is called free translation. And the next kind we have adaptation translation. This is a free form of translation. We have to base on the both cultural factors, and also we have to base on the kind of situation. Yeah, especially the focus is on socio-cultural phenomena or practices. Yeah, so it is called adaptation. Because in each kind of situation we have a different meaning. Yeah, for one word, but in different situation we have a different meaning. So that is called why adaptation translation. And the next kind of translation we have a this translation. So what is this translation? We have to translate only the main idea. Yeah. Or we pay in a sentence, in a paragraph, we pay attention to solely the keywords. So the important words. We do the translating on all the keywords or the important words. So that is called the this translation, because this is the main idea. And now we move on to the next kind of translation. That is the word structure. Yeah, so the word structures, maybe there are several kinds of structure. The first kind, that is the free morpheme. The second kind, that is the bound morpheme. And also the next we have derived words, and we may have compound. And now we move on to word category. The word category we have now verb, adjective, adverb, etc. And also we learn something about grammar. It is necessary to find the different part of speech, and that is the use of article, noun, adjective, preposition, etc. Sometimes the translation experience indicate that the learner translator must base themselves on the word categorization in order to decode the meaning of the text. And now we move on to the word meaning. So the word meaning, we have two kinds of word meaning: denotation and connotation. Connotation is the meaning we can get from dictionary. But connotation, we have to get the meaning from situation, meaning when we add some kind of feelings, some kind of emotion. Especially we can say that connotative meaning show the emotion of the user, of the speaker, of the writer. And also we learn something about polysemy and homonymy. And we can use synonym and antonym in doing the translation. And especially we have figurative meaning. Sometimes it means figurative meaning is the indirect meaning. So there should be a combination between direct and indirect meaning. So figurative meaning means the imagination, situational in direct meaning. And for the component of meaning and concept, we have several kind of concept here. In general, we have a thing, attribute, event, relation. And for the concept, we have the concept of gender and the form of words, and also the relation of words. And for translating concept, we should pay attention to the match between two languages. For example, how can we match? Let's say cook, người nấu ăn; runner, người chạy, and etc. And also in the next kind, there should be in the combination between the verb, different part, and the noun, different part of speech. Yeah, we know the relationship between the attribute, the component of the word, and also the sentence. And our restatement, sometimes we have to state. It means that you have to try to rewrite here the message in another structure. And what about collocation? Collocation is the two or more words that often go together. And the combination just automatically appear in chunks or blocks rather than a single word. It means that several words come together. They stay side by side. And when we use the collocation, we have the whole phrase. Now, for example, in say quick meal, fast food, and then say fast train, or bread and butter. Yeah, it is called collocation. And what about phrasal unit? In the phrasal unit, we have 3 kinds. And we have phrasal verb, phrasal preposition, and phrasal conjunction. And for the next, we have idiom. Yeah, actually, when we do the translation, sometimes if we learn by heart some idiom, we can use the idiom in your translation. Why? Sometimes it will make your translation more interesting, and it is better for you. Sometimes, but for sometimes we use idiom, not always. Yeah, because too many idiom will spoil your translation, and sometimes too many idiom can make the reader misunderstand, yeah, the message. And the next thing, when we do the translation of proper name, and this is also a method in doing the translation. Especially we have a proper noun and proper name. Sometimes we can translate proper noun, sometimes we can borrow and we can keep the same. But mostly we keep the same. Yeah, in order to avoid the misunderstanding. Yeah, we only sometimes for the name of a country, the name of the place. Yeah, we can do the translation. For example, Moscow, we can say Moscow. London, we can translate London. Yeah, but sometimes, not always. And we have several things. The proper noun sometimes do not accept the demonstrative pronoun as a determiner. So be careful of this. And proper noun do not accept restrictive adjective or restrictive relative clauses. So be careful when we do the translating. Now in translating proper name, the translator will take the following consideration. For example, the name of country, the name of town, and we can give the same, but sometimes we have to change. And for the name of organization, we never have a translation equivalent. Hanoi Open University is say Viện Đại học Mở Hanoi. Yeah, sometimes we have an equivalent like this. And also sometimes the features of proper noun, pronoun here, can be used as a common noun. Say random, Churchill. Sometimes we can know the name of object, such as Honda, Nhân dân. Sometimes we can translate or can be imported unchanged from the short language text. Yeah, sometimes we can use the feature like phonological or graphological. That is called transliteration. For example, Beijing, we translate into Bắc-Kinh. Moscow, we turn into Moscow. London is say London. And also we have several ways to note with proper name. Yeah, and that is called recreation in some cases. The name we may have the new creation. And also substitution. Yeah, sometimes they might be omitted together. And now we move on to the next case called translation strategy. That is called transference. Yeah. So what is transference? The short language word is brought into the target language. It is the process of transferring from a short language word exactly to target language text. In this case, it is called a loan word. And for cultural equivalent, this is an appropriate translation where a short language cultural word is translated by a target language cultural word. Yeah, sometimes it is very difficult to find the right cultural equivalent. Not always. And using the componential analysis, the short language word is replaced with a more general target language word. In this case, it is called superordinate. Yeah, we have to plus one or more target language and component to complete the meaning, which is not embodied within the first target language word. Using this strategy, the translator explains the description or function of the idea embodied in the short language word. And using recognized translation, in this case we can use a borrowed word. And you may add, you may give some notes, and also with literal translation, we pay attention to the grammatical structure. And for classifier, we may find the classical cultural equivalent and couplet. Couplet is helpful when two strategies are used to solve a single problem. It means that is the combination. Complete means the combination of the two translation strategy. And next we may have a sentence structures, and mostly the common form we have a verb, the subject and the verb. And sometimes we have a subject, verb, and object. Here now we have several sentence structure here. Subject verbs, SVC, SVA, SVO, SVOC, etc. Another feature of the subject here. The subject can be a noun, the subject can be a pronoun, the subject can be a phrase, the subject can be even a clause. And sometimes we have indefinite subject. For example, someone, somebody. It is called indefinite because we are not clear about this. Now, what about the verb? We have two kinds of verb. Yeah, we have transitive verb and we have intransitive verb. And also we may have stative verb. We also have action verb. And also the verb can be influenced by the kind of tenses. Yeah, so in equivalent to Vietnamese we say đã, sẽ, sắp, đang. Okay, they are equivalent to the tenses in English with the verb. And now passive. When we do the translating, sometimes we can use the active form, sometimes we can use the passive voice. But mostly when we use the passive, we want to show the objective case. But when we have an active voice, we can show the subjective voice as a subjective case. But mostly we use the passive voice for objective case. And now we move on to the concept of finite clause. In this case, finite clause contains a verb. Yeah, a verb should be he. A verb can be conjugated. But for non-finite clauses, in non-finite clauses, we have a no verb conjugated. And there are three kinds of non-finite verb, non-finite clause here. We have ed, that is called past participle, present participle, and to infinitive, three kinds. And for the verbless clause, we can use only noun, only adjective or adverb. And for the phrase, we have a different kind of phrase, verb phrase, noun phrase, and adjective phrase. It depends on the meaning of the sentence. We can use the right phrase. For more sentence about the sentence structure, we should know the noun phrase and the verb phrase, and sometimes there should be combination between the noun phrase and a noun, the adjective phrase. For the verb phrase, sometimes verb phrase should contain the modal verb, the auxiliary verb, and then we have the main verb. The main verb we may have a lexical verb, and sometimes we can use the prepositional phrases. Yeah, it is rather common for us to use the prepositional phrases with the use of preposition in front. And now we move on to proposition. It is a grouping of concepts into a unit. We communicate. Actually, it is a kind of expressing an idea. So an idea can be performed in different way. Now, for example, John hit Peter. Peter was hit by John. The hitting of Peter by John. Peter who was hit by John. Now we have a different proposition. Although we have only one idea, and sometimes we have to identify the event proposition basing on the use of grammatical sentence, grammatical structure. And also we know something about linguistic transposition. In the aspect of the adjective can be replaced by adverb, and verb by nouns, etc. You may have a multi-word verb phrase. And next, a phrase of one kind in English can be rendered a phrase. Yeah, and a clause can be turned into a phrase or a word. And sometimes finite clause can be turned into non-finite. And next, subordinate can turn into main clause and vice versa. And non-defining clause can be turned into the defining clause. Sentence can be turned into a clause and vice versa. And a compound sentence can be rendered as a simple sentence. And sometimes a compound sentence can turn into a complex. And a complex sentence can be turned into a compound. And also a passive voice can turn into an active voice. And integral sentence in English can be rendered or turned into a request or order. Yeah, sometimes we can turn into and vice versa. And what about modulation? Modulation consists of using a phrase that is different from the short and the language, as long as it can be conveyed to, it can convey the same idea. And what about the style and the register? It depends on the abilities of translator. The translator has a duty to prove the register. So what does the register mean? And the register mean actually the number of words of vocabulary, yeah, the translator possesses. And of course, he or she has to pay attention to the style of writing. And anything can be said in one language can be said in another. Yeah, so it is possible to translate. The goal of the translator is to keep the meaning constant. And now we have the process of translation. We have several steps. Now, first step is approaching the text. In this case, we have to do a lot of analysis in order to understand the text. And we also have to answer some question: what, why, who, how. So why we have to put question? Because we put question in order to analyze the text. And the second step, interpreting the short text. In this step, we have to analyze the words, analyze the grammatical structure. You have to find down the ambiguity, try to identify the implicit information. I mean the hidden information. And the step 3. In this, we have to formulate the translated text. It means that you have to make the initial draft. And step 4, in this step, we have to read the translated text again, and then you have to review and try to find out the mistake and the possible mistake. And you may have some comparison contrast in order to find out some of the mistake and correct it. And the step 5, in this case, you have to edit the translated text, and you have to make the final draft. you may, in this case, you may change some, you may do some changes. Okay, thank you. That's enough for today. Thank you for listening. If you want to ask something, you may post it on the forum. Thank you for listening once again.